I was discussing the tastes of Passover. Specifically, we find that with regards to these mitzvahs that we have to do the first night of Passover, the taste is what matters. Let's have a quick review of the points we made last time, and we'll get to the main point over here. First, we said that there happens to be an interesting halacha with regards to the way the Kohanim eat the korbanot. Halacha is that Kohanim who eat sacrificial meat within the temple can do so any which way they choose. It doesn't have to taste a certain way. They could spice it up anyway. They could cook it anyway, and that's the halacha. And by the way, it seems that that is also the halacha regarding any other sacrificial foods that other Jews might eat within Jerusalem. Talking about, let's say, korban todah, korban shlamim, the Thanksgiving offering, the feast offering, what's also known as the peace offering. All of these sacrifices can be consumed any which way. There is no specific commandments or halachas regarding how they have to be cooked or how they have to taste. And then we saw that there is this issue over here, mentioned in Hulin, Rav Chisda's rule, that the Kohanim should eat their priestly portions of non-sacrificial meat. Where do we get that from? That's basically any time an animal is slaughtered, let's say in our slaughterhouses. So the proprietors are supposed to give certain pieces to the Kohen. And those pieces are the Kohen's property. They're not considered holy food, but they are considered a divine commandment for the person to give to the Kohen. He could eat them with anybody he likes. He doesn't have to treat them with any special level of purity, for example. And there he said that they should be eaten roasted. And the reason for this type of meat being specifically roasted, eaten in that state, is for the same reason that the Kohanim are allowed to eat their sacrificial meat any which way they like within the temple. Why? Because that's a privilege given to them for their greatness. So there's sort of a contradiction here, especially because we see that there's a higher standard, apparently this one, which I'm highlighting over here, a higher standard for the way sacrificial meat is to be eaten. Sorry, a higher standard for non-sacrificial meat, the way it's to be eaten, than for actual sacrificial meat, which is usually considered to be the chomer, not the kal. It's the more stringent halacha. So we find that there's a law that's applicable, a stringency that's applicable to that which should be treated more lenient, and there's a leniency uh, next to that which we find to be more stringent. So there's a little bit of contradiction here, perhaps. I don't know, but once you see this idea, there is this concept that perhaps eating meat roasted is the superior way to eat the meat, the superior form of cooking. But then again, we're left with this question. So why isn't it reserved for sacrificial food also? So we will leave it at that. Then we saw the halachas regarding maror, bitter herbs, and we pointed out that the whole point of this particular commandment is not to eat a specific vegetable, but to eat the specific vegetable because of its taste. And we saw a number of halachas that have to do with preserving the taste of the vegetable, such that, let's say it's become wilted or dried, as long as it still has that taste, that appropriate taste of maror, it still counts. Then a person can discharge his obligation to eat maror on the first night of Passover with such a vegetable. But if it's been cooked or stewed, or it's somehow gotten to a point where it doesn't have its taste anymore, now it no longer counts as maror. And we also pointed out that the Mishnah actually names the five herbs that can be used for this purpose. And what do they all have in common? They're maror, they're bitter. That's the point. The taste is the point. On Leil Pesach, suddenly, this first commandment, which, by the way, if one does not have Korban Pesach on the table, is only a rabbinic commandment. I don't say nowadays, because nowadays we should have Korban Pesach, and God willing, we will have that in a month's time. So get ready. Don't forget, get your Haggadah Pesach right now. I'm not the exclusive provider or distributor, but I am the main one. So if you want, please contact me privately. And we'll move on to the next commandment, the ta'am of matzah, the taste of matzah. Matzah also, as we saw before, has to do with the ingredients. Matzah is supposed to taste like one of the true grains. When I say true grain, I'm referring to the wheat and spelt barley. And then the question about what about oats and rye? Do those count as one of both of those? Are they one of the five? It's a good question. We saw in years past that there are those who make good arguments that perhaps oats shouldn't be on the list, and neither should rye. So we'll work with barley, spelt, and uh, and wheat. Barley, spelt, and wheat. Those are the main ones. Thank you very much. Everything else that's not a true grain, but is used like a grain, including rice and millet and oats and rye, if they're not true grains, are what we call kitnis. And we saw that Chazal had a special place for specifically rice, which I'm highlighting here, wheat and rice matzah, as opposed to wheat and some other type of uh, kitnis thrown in there, or matzah made with something that's not wheat, let's say barley matzah made with rice. There's one din over here and one din over there. Either way, they're different. The only question is the interpretation. The point was that the matzah has to have the specific taste of the true grain, the wheat, the barley, or the rot, the wheat, the barley, or the spelt, perhaps the rye also. And if it doesn't have that taste, then one is not discharging his obligation. And of course, we saw that there's nothing about the kashrus of such material for Passover. All of them are 100% kosher for Passover and may be consumed on Passover. The only question is a person discharging his obligation? So we saw that the taste is what matters. And we closed with this line in the Rambam where he says that cooked matzah does not count for the mitzvah. Yeah, it's 100% kosher also, despite what some Hasidim believe. But because it is lacking the taste of bread, it no longer tastes like bread. That's this line in the purple. Now, one does not discharge his obligation. We're going to see that this is a very consequential rule, which we'll get into now when we talk about the taste of Korban Pesach specifically. Korban Pesach has a unique din. It must be eaten roasted. We saw that the Sefer HaChinuch tries to offer what he believes to be the reasons for these various commandments. So we have here the first commandment. This is only his seventh commandment. Well, because the commandments start when we get around to Passover in the book of Exodus. He has over here, why are we not supposed to eat the meat cooked? He says over here, Lefisha kach derech b'nei malachim yisar lechol basar tzli shumachal tov mutam aval shara am enam yichlim lechol ma'at basar shetasigadam kim vushal kadei l'malei v'tnam. He says here, it must be that we're told not to cook the Pesach and instead roast it. The same, the two sides of the same coin. One's the positive commandment to eat it roasted, the negative commandment to eat it cooked or not to eat it cooked. The reason is we're supposed to eat it like Bnei Malachim and Sarim. They're people who are higher up on the socioeconomic scale get to roast their meat. The people who are poorer, they have to cook it some other way in order so that it's more filling for them. So we saw that, well, yeah, make a cholent out of it. Yeah, if you have meat, you might as well make a cholent out of it, or a soup. Make sure to consume the whole thing. I remember Rabbi Oshri has a tshuva. Who's Rabbi Oshri? Rabbi Oshri was the Rav, I think, at the Kovno ghetto and a Holocaust survivor, a very pious man, and he wrote the shoot Mima Makim, the responsa from the Holocaust. I remember they had a very well illustrated cover. Okay, it has a very distinctive cover to that book in the English edition. So he has a few tshuvas there from the Holocaust, and he testifies about how sometime in the ghetto they actually obtained meat. Remember, in the ghetto they had starvation rations, just like bread and water and things like that for quite a while, but they obtained meat, and he told them what they should do is they should stew it. That way they could, our dry bones need as much food as possible, so that's how they should prepare it. Okay, so I showed that there's a little bit of kasha over here. And I'm going to point out some other things when we read that next one of the next sections. Okay, so here's the problem. The problem was that the Kohanim normally eat sacrificial food. Shulchan Gavo Kozachi. That means they're receiving portions from God's own table. They've been highly privileged. So how come this is specifically reserved for just the Korban Pesach? That on Korban Pesach, all Israelites have to eat the meat roasted. Why not all sacrificial meat all the time? And by the way, all sacrificial meat has a chumrah to it. It is the chomer. It can only be eaten in the Azara, for example. It can only be eaten by Kohanim. It has a very limited time, but Korban Pesach also has a limited time. You see, there should be, if this halacha was, whatever it is, it should exist there. And if this is the reason, so Gav Chomer. What?
Why should it exist?
With regard to kachim, because kachim are more holy. They're the chomer.
What does it have to do with Kedusha?
What does it have to do with Kedusha? The holier it is, the more stringencies. The more stringent the korban, the more halachas that apply to it.
Pesach
has its own stringencies. Okay, fine, maybe. It says so Pesach has its own stringency, but what's the reason? The reason the chinuch is offering is because we're supposed to be like free men. Derech b'nei malachim and sarim. But that reason applies to the Kohanim. The Kohanim are privileged. It says l'mashcha b'hem ligdula. It's their anointing. Who's anointed? Who's considered the anointed? Not every Kohen's anointed, by the way. The Kohen Gadol and the king. A Mashiach is a person. It's their Gedula. It's translated into Aramaic as their greatness. Because I'll say, what? What was that?
A coin isn't a melech.
A Kohen is not a melech, but it's their greatness. They're below a malachim. Bnei malachim are not malachim. Okay, bnei malachim sarim. They're God's ministers, so to speak. Either way, it's a little bit tricky. This is the chinuch's guess, by the way. What the chinuch is saying is not explicit in the Talmud, right? As a matter of fact, we're about to see that it's there. It's actually against what's in the Talmud. Okay, that's the problem. So you should also look at the source there. You'll see we're going to get to it. The next mitzvah talks about shviras etzem. We're not allowed to break the bones of the korban pesach. Normally, and this applies anybody who knows how to done butchering before, you have to break a few bones or cut through some bones in order to eat any meat. Chickens, we break bones when we eat chicken, and we have to cut through the bones when we eat beef also, right? Matter of fact, many steaks have they have a special machine that's very good at cutting. They actually cut through the bone, right? That's what they do. And that's what it's assumed. Most people would break the bones or cut through the bones. But for the Korban Pesach, the joints have to be dislocated. It's forbidden to take a cleaver and cleave through the bones of the Pesach or to break them by hand. And that's why the Korban Pesach is specifically roasted. This is a chumrah also found only with regards to the Korban Pesach. The other sacrificial foods, not only can the Kohanim break the bones to eat them, as a matter of fact, we saw that most of the sacrifices, when they were offered on the altar, whether burnt offerings or the pieces from other offerings, basically the animal's dismembered. A burnt offering, what do you have to do? They take a cleaver and they actually cut through, they break some joints with that. But for Korban Pesach, you're supposed to eat it roasted. They cut out the chalavim and the emurim of the Korban Pesach. That means the entrails of the forbidden fats of the Korban Pesach, they're offered on the altar, are excised from the belly. They cut through, just like skin to get to them. So this is a good question. And the Chinuch offers what he believes to be the reason for this prohibition of breaking the bones of the Pesach. This is on page, what page is this? I don't know. It's not telling me. It's basically Sefer HaChinuch in part 4, Tam HaPesach. The second Sefer HaChinuch, Mitzvah Tes Zayin. So that's what the Chinuch says. I'll read what the Chinuch says. He says here, She'en kavod livnei malachim v'yoatzei eretz ligror atzmot u'shavrom kith lavim. It's not proper, once again, for bnei malachim, sons of kings, and yoatzei eretz. What are yoatzei eretz or yoatzei aretz? Advisors of the land. That means also it's milim nirdafos, a synonym for sarim. Achashverosh had sarim, right? Who are the sarim who surrounded him? The ones who, they're his advisors. And that's why they're called Yoatzim here. Yoatzei Aretz means not advisors of the land, it means advisors of the throne. Okay, they're higher ups. And it says they're not supposed to be scraping the bones and breaking them like dogs. Okay, dogs, well, how does a dog eat? You ever see a dog basically eat the bone bare? So it's not proper that when we eat our sacrificial food on Passover that we do it like dogs do, break the bones. Lo ye'ot la'asot, it's not proper to do such. Except for the poor of the land who are hungry, desperate to get more food, so finally get some meat to eat. So he says that's why. What? Aniyeh ha'am. Yeah. Okay, what did I say? What the land? Okay.
No, I said but the Kohanim are poor.
Okay. Well, no, we're just talking about breaking the Korban Pesach bones. Everybody. We're not just talking about Kohanim now. We're talking about the Isser of breaking Korban Pesach. Who eats Korban Pesach? Every Jew. Okay?
Yeah,
even children technically.
Yeah.
So the question is, I know that if this was the reason, like it's not kavod malachim or bnei malachim to break the bones of the meat that they're eating, so why would Kohanim be allowed to do so in the Beis Hamikdash itself, in front of God, eating off of his table or eating even with him? Remember, the Kohanim have to eat kachim the same in what's halachically the azara. The azara is also where the chalavim are burnt on the mizbeach, right? So there's two tables there's three tables in the temple. There's a table of the showbread, and by the way, who eats of that? The frankincense is given to God and burned on Shabbos. The bread isn't eaten entirely by the Kohanim. There's a table from which the Kohanim eat their sacrificial meat, and that's the Kohanim eating. And the Kohanim eat, and the owners of the sacrifices attain atonement from that. And then there's the altar of God, which the prophet says is God's table, so to speak. Okay, this is God's table, and the Kohanim get portions. Some goes to God, some goes to the Kohanim. It's where God shares His food with His chosen ones. So it makes we should be asking this question: if this is indeed the reason for the prohibition of breaking the bones of Korban Pesach, it's about being refined and about being honorable. So Kal v'chomer should apply to the rest of the kachim. Now, why don't we find this mitzvah elsewhere? Okay, but Chazal, but not even the Chazal. The Torah tells us that this mitzvah specifically applies. The mitzvah of roasting the Korban Pesach and not cooking it and not breaking the bones. Three specific mitzvahs. These are the reasons the chinuch uh, uh, offered for them. Okay, so it's not proper. Questions until this point? No. So let's see. Well, say from I don't have us in the stack over here, but we have 5 copies over there. Yeah. Yeah. I should get myself a complete set. I've been collecting. I recommend this to everybody. These were put out by 2 different companies. One's Korean, that's a blue one, and the Makbilis. So I have a full set, but I keep with me in the base medrash the small ones. Why? Because they're convenient, and because people eventually just give them away. Sometimes there's genizas and all that. People throw these away. So I'm trying to create my own set of the small ones, just to keep with me for quick reference. When we were in yeshiva, it used to be guys had small shas with them, so they always had a whole shas in front of them, at least a bavli, and a whole Rambam with all the mafarshim. So I have a shas behind me, or quite a few shasas behind me, and the Rambam's over on the other side, so I keep the Rambams here also. How can you learn without the Rambam, like Rav Tzuriel said? Okay, let's move on. Here's a Yerushalmi, which also has an interesting point, which makes you wonder basically what's the chicken or the egg here. Yerushalmi, this is in Psachim, of course. It says Tani Chagigata Brasar Haita Ba'amina Maser. Perhaps this is not so relevant yet, but it's talking about the other festival offering that's supposed to be brought with Korban Pesach. Korban Pesach is supposed to be eaten some years with an additional sacrifice, and that's supposed to be from beef. It's supposed to be taken from bakar. And it's a pasuk that says, "V'zavachta Pesach Hashem al-kechat tzon vakar." It should be from the flock, and it should be of the cattle. Wait, Korban Pesach is only supposed to be a lamb or a goat in its first year. So where does the cattle come in here? The answer: to give more food to the participants. If you have a Korban Pesach that's supposed to be shared by 200 people, people aren't going to sitting at the table. They're not going to be getting so much meat from the Pesach. Yes, so they fill themselves with the meat from, let's say, this bull that's brought alongside the Korban Pesach, and that's supposed to be roasted also. So this statement says that a person can spend his so-called Meiser money. By Meiser money, I don't mean the colloquial a person's being pious and giving 10% of his income to the poor. That's what we normally refer to as Meiser money. Here it's talking about money that's actually been exchanged for the second tithe. A person is supposed to take a second tithe in years 1, 2, 4, and 5 from his crop. That tithe is produce that's supposed to be eaten in Jerusalem. If he's not going to get to Jerusalem in time before the produce is going to go bad, so he's supposed to exchange it for money and use that money, that minted money, bring that to Jerusalem and use that to buy food, which is then consumed in Jerusalem. So this statement says that if a person has such money that has basically been exchanged for his second tithe, he could use it to buy or towards funding the acquisition of the animal that is to be eaten as the Chagiga along with the Korban Pesach. And Rabbi Yaakov Baracha says in Shmuel Bar Abba's name, Zod Omeret Shehu Reshut. This is basically telling us that the Chagiga is not something that's required. It's an option. And indeed, as we pointed out in Haggadah Pesach, there's a line there that we mention the Chagiga, but some years we don't have it. There's a lot of years where it's not brought. If Chas v'Shalom, things continue the way they are, we won't be able to do Korban Pesach b'Tara, so we won't have a Chagiga, for example. In Temar Chova, Davar Shehu Ba Chova, Ba Min Maaser. Because if you said that this is obligatory to bring the Chagiga of the 14th of Nisan, that's what says our Ba'asar, the Chagiga 14th of Nisan, Davar Shehu Ba Chova, Ba Min Maaser. You would be forced to say that a person could spend his Meiser money on something that's obligatory, which isn't true. So it must be the Chagiga is just an option. It's not required. Otherwise, a person would be able to spend his Meiser money on it. Remember, you're not supposed to spend your so-called Meiser money, this Meiser money, on that which you're obligated to bring to the temple anyways. Another statement, Tani Chagiga ba'imam Pesach ha'ita ne'achelet techila kedei she'ye'achel ha'Pesach la'sova. Says here that the festival offering that accompanied the Passover, which is basically synonymous with this Chagigat Arba Asar, the festival offering of the 14th. Normally, a Chagigah is supposed to be offered on one of the regalim. The 14th of Nisan is technically not one of the Shalosh regalim, right? So it must be Shalosh regalim. So it must be that this Chagigat Abayim Pesach is the 14th one. So this was eaten first, and that's the way we have it also in the Haggadah here. That first we make the bracha on the consumption of the Chagiga, and then most of that's eaten. And the Pesach is eaten afterwards, ala sova. And if a person only has a kazayas of Pesach, he waits to the very end of his meal to eat that. That way, he eats it with satiety. And he continues, "V'lo yeyachel Pesach lasova." Okay, and he can't just be eating korban Pesach to satiate himself. Rabbi Yossi be Rabbi Boon b'shem Rabbi Yaakov bar Desai shelo yavo lidei shvirat etzem. He says this isn't the reason. Technically speaking, you could eat the Pesach to satiety if there's enough meat to go around. The reason we eat Chagiga along with Korban Pesach is shelo yavo lidei shvirat etzem, so that a person doesn't come to the state that he might have to start breaking the bones of Pesach to get more meat out of it. If there's not a lot of Korban Pesach meat to go around, so you'll have to start, okay, break the bones, get into the marrow, do something. We want no one to feel that he doesn't have enough Korban Pesach meat. So what should he do? Bring a Chagiga. So what does this mean? Eat more or bring more meat to the table so that you don't come to the state of breaking the bones. That is, Chazal saw the breaking the bones as the prohibition, so they want to help people eat properly so they not come to this position already that they break the bones. What is Yerushalmi saying here? I put a note for everybody here. According to the Chinuch, it's forbidden Nesar. Oh, Nesra. This should be Nesra. Can you believe that? What a mistake. Naval Chinuch Nesra Shvirat Etzem Kadesh Nochal Kamachubadim. Should be Kamachubadim. See? According to the Chinuch, we were forbidden to break the bones of the Pesach so that we come to eat it like respectable people, right? Okay. Like honorable people. And according to Yerushalmi, we eat the Chagiga before we eat Korban Pesach so that we don't come to break the Pesach's bones when we start looking through meat. So Chazal were assuming that if you just have Korban Pesach on the table, people would, start eating it like a little bit ravenously, perhaps less respectfully. Well, nowadays, based on Western culture, what's the wrong way to eat food? With one's hands, right? You have to use a fork. And how could you eat meat? If you would pick up finger food, like eating ribs with one's hands, is considered, at least in the West, as a little bit uncouth, right? Not really anymore. Okay, proper company, you'd have to use a fork and a knife. Did Chazal ever say such a thing? Do Chazal have a problem with people eating meat with their hands? Well, Chazal, yes, they have mazligot are mentioned in the Tanakh, as were knives.
Like to take stuff out of the fire.
Yeah, yes, and that's actually mentioned explicitly in the book of Samuel.
No, but
okay. So Chazal assume that people are eating with their hands. By the way, a lot of the Mishnahs assume that they're eating with their hands, just like we Daf Yomi finished Bava Kama, right? What kind of animals do Jews have around the house? Well, Jews have chickens, they have oxen, they have sheep, right? Some even have pigs. Unfortunately, pigs are even mentioned. Your pig does damage, and we saw that people have dogs. Right? Jews have dogs, in Frummy land, Jews don't work in things like agriculture or animal husbandry. That means raising animals. And they certainly don't have dogs, but we see that was the case. The question is, what if a person's dog picks up the biscuit and burns down picks up the coal and burns down the guddish, right? There's a few Mishnayos that assume that Jews had dogs. What are you going to do? Okay. So here, the Mishnayos assume, and so does the Rambam, that people eat with their hands. Yes, they do have kalim also, but it wasn't considered wrong to eat with one's hands. So people eat meat with their hands. Okay, they pick up the bone and they eat it. They eat it off the bone. So according to the Yerushalmi is assuming that people are picking up bones and eating things off the bone. They just want there to be so much meat to go around that people wouldn't come to then want to break the bones to get to the rest of the meat. Okay. So I'm just going to say that. I think that there's a disconnect between the Yerushalmi and the Chinuch, to say this nicely. The Yerushalmi says, people would come to break the bones, but there's an isser. Normally, Kohanim were not worried to let them break the bones, right? They're eating the meat. Kohanim in the Beis Hamikdash would pick up meat and all that, and there's no worry, so they eat it. They eat it whichever way they want. But because the Torah commanded they not break the bones of the Korban Pesach, Chazal told us that you're supposed to bring a Chagigah, additional meat, to the Korban Pesach Seder, So they have more to eat. So you're not going to be looking to, you know, eat up the very last morsels from the bones. Okay, so there's a little there. So now let's ask another question on the. The third question we have is Halo sibat isur nal v'shal mirumaz b'shnei talmudim. The prohibition of eating na'um v'shal means cooked korban pesach or partially cooked korban pesach is already alluded to in the Talmud. Halohu shatzli mishamer tamo shal pesach, because what is it? Roasting the meat of korban pesach preserves the flavor of korban pesach, and mivushal mufag tamo means the taste has been ruined. It's been released. What's hafaga mean? Well, it's pag tokef in modern Hebrew. What? It's like expired, right? Okay. Yeah. So there things go flat. You have some taste of food that gets old, even if it's not going to be spoiled, it's already not going to be as tasty, right? So lahafig ta'am means to cause the taste to leave something. You could do all sorts of things to food in order to get it to lose its taste. How do you cause fruits and vegetables to lose their taste, or most other things? What do they tell you to do? You're going to be eating spinach. What's the best way to eat your spinach? Straight up, right? But if you want to cook your spinach, it used to be people would boil the spinach, right? They boil vegetables like broccoli and spinach and other healthy things. Then they pour off the water. But a lot of the vitamins and nutrients are in the water. So if you made soup out of your vegetables and you drank all the soup, so you have all the vitamins still, right? But if you boil vegetables like broccoli and spinach, you're basically losing a lot of the nutrients. So they said steam your vegetables, but most people don't steam anymore. But anyways, you steam it, still a lot of vegetables go into the water that you're using for the steaming, and you don't drink that water, so you lose a lot of the vitamins. You could have much higher iron content in B12 if you would just eat the vegetable straight up. So what's the best way to cook the vegetables? Microwave. Don't remove the water. Just heat up the vegetable, but make sure everything's still inside there. Just eat the vegetable raw. But some people don't want the vegetables raw. We see that one of the best ways to make anything lose its flavor is by boiling it. You boil celery. Does celery have a strong taste? Boil your vegetables. Take any vegetable, boil it alone, and then throw out the water and eat the vegetable. It'll have a lot less flavor than it would have had you eaten it raw, right? So that's hafagat tam. And the same thing with meat. Meat's flavor is more intense if you were to just eat it straight up. But if you were to boil a piece of meat and then throw away the water and then eat this boiled piece of meat, it has less taste, right? Well, yeah, okay. So I wanted to point out that we don't need to do what the chinuch here says, that the reason for roasting the meat is to eat it in a more honorable way, because indeed it says that roasting meat is better for the matanos. But we never saw that with kachim. As a matter of fact, with kachim, we saw the exact opposite. Not only that, if this was the reason, we would have seen it somewhere. And we saw that with regards to the matanos, it's just recommended. That was the bottom line. The way the poskim understood it, starting with Tosfos, was that when Rav Chisda said that they should eat the meat roasted and they should eat it with mustard, it was a recommendation, an example. But in Achinami, if the Kohen likes his meat pot roasted, then that's better to eat the matanos. So here's how we want to prove it. This is the main point. So I was arguing with this with someone like a month ago. So it's in his honor that we're pointing this out because it's not so explicit in the Talmud. It says the reason for the commandment to eat korban pesach specifically roasted and not cooked some other way is to preserve the taste. But as we shall see, that's the assumption that the sages were talking about. And there's a few reasons when you study this sugya, you'll see that is the underlying assumption of all the sages. Despite how they might come to different halachic conclusions, they all make this assumption. Okay, so after I drink, well, we just had it fast, so now it's like I'm catching up on my water. So, what's that? I brought that here. What's a canteen?
No, it's a water bottle.
Oh, just a plain water bottle. Okay. There's
There's
no army issued canteen.
only when you're in basic training because there's some.
Well, I imagine also they're too small, right?
It's only actually two of them that's a liter.
They tell my 8-year-old that he's going on a trip with them. He has to schlep along 3 liters of water in his backpack. They make you keep 3 liters of water also?
Yeah.
Okay, fine.
You have a camelback.
I've never seen a child his size go through 3 liters of water, but whatever. Still young.
Assuming they just don't want some kids people take them.
Yeah, but kids take these things much easier. They go on Tiyul and stuff like in the heat. It bothers, let's say, a man my size much more than a child. Children get a lot less bothered by the heat and the cold than grown people for some reason. Okay, let's see. Here's the Mishnah. The Mishnah is in the second chapter of Pesachim, the eighth Mishnah. It says, "Ein mevashlim et Pesach, lo b'mashkin, lo v'lo b'mei pirot." We do not cook the Passover, not in any types of liquids, nor in juices. But you can baste it or dip it into it. What does that mean? Basting means, sachin means when you're roasting meat, you pour something on it, something liquid, either its own gravy or some other sauce that you've made. That's called basting. Matbilin is what you would do once the meat's on your plate, you put some ketchup or mustard on your plate and you stick it in there, or barbecue sauce. I wouldn't know. I personally believe that eating ketchup is a little very, very also uncouth. Okay. And specifically eating it on Shabbos. Eating ketchup on Shabbos is even worse, or Yom Tov. It's so weekday, you know? Yeah, I don't know. That's just my feeling. Okay, but I don't know. I just ketchup. I remember my mother asked the rabbi a Shilo, it must have been more than 30 years ago, regarding preparing some sort of meat for Passover. So the halacha is, if you're in Chutz, you shouldn't have roasted meat on Passover. That's a minhag. The halacha is you shouldn't have roasted lamb, a whole roasted lamb, because that gedim kulas, that looks like a korban pesach. That Chazal said no one's allowed to have. There's various minhagim of not eating roasted meat leil pesach, lest it look like kachim. So he said, you cook it, you pot roast the meat, cook it with a lot of sauces, or put a lot of ketchup on it. He said, remember, because I took the phone call when the rabbi called back, not my mother. So he says, put a lot of ketchup. I remember thinking, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to cook my meat with ketchup. But whatever. Apparently, it doesn't taste like ketchup if you cook it through. And nowadays, I understand why it would be a good idea. But that's what mabilin means. So you're not supposed to cook the korban pesach within a liquid, but in achidami you could baste it. It's sitting there. It's roasting in the oven over the fire, so you could do whatever you want with it then. And it also, once it's on the plate, you could put as much sauce as you want on it. Okay, duck sauce. But
you baste it or put juices on it, whatever while it's cooking.
no, it doesn't. That doesn't do the same thing like cooking it within the juice.
It's the same thing, but how?
No, it doesn't.
They say
It
has to be with the pesach. How close to?
Well, it's only on the surface. Basting something, just make sure it doesn't dry out. Whatever it has, people Chazal knew what they were talking about when they did this.
Okay, like a very strong base.
No, but whatever. Basting, when you pour something on that's over an open fire, it barely stays on it. Like mostly falls off of it.
You also paint it.
No, you can paint it on with a brush, but it's not the same as cooking within the juices. So the Yerushalmi there says, and for those people who are looking at home, I color coded this because we're going to see that certain statements or their halachic consequences appear elsewhere. So in order to keep track of who said what, I color coded it. So this is the gold opinion, just in this corner color. It says, they quote Shmos, Uvashel mivushal mayim. It says you shouldn't eat it cooked or bashel or mivushal in water. And it says here, in water, ain the elamayim. So I know not to cook the korban pesach in, let's say, a pot of water. Minayin lira both shar mashkin. How do I know that even if I fill it with some other mashkin? By the way, mei peiros is what they refer to as fruit juices. When I was in America, I was told that the translation of juice is meats. And the type of juices we ate were apple, orange, and grape. And generally speaking, even if they're made from concentrate, it was still just, you squeeze the fruit, and that's the juice that comes out, right? And you can concentrate by removing the water, then putting the water back. But in essence, it's still mostly just the juice, right?
Okay.
And then you come to Israel. It turns out the word they told you in grade school in America, meats, does not refer to juice. Here they refer to all sorts of artificial soft drinks as meats, right? And if you want actual orange juice, you have to get something that's called sachut, right? Actual squeezed orange juice.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's kind of strange. So that's why I think it's better to call them mei peiros, to be more specific. Mei peiros means the actual juice of the fruit. So how do you know not to use other mashkin, other liquids or beverages to cook the korban pesach? Talmud Lamar, uvashel mivushal, bashel mivushal, as we say in yeshivish, mikol makom. It doesn't matter which kind of bishul. Bishul normally means with liquids. So not just water. Bashel mivushal is a drasha. It's an exposition. They expound the Torah to say that when it used this extraneous language, it meant any liquid. You could fill that pot with orange juice or with apple juice or wine, as it may be, vinegar, whatever it is. However you cook your korban pesach in this liquid, which might include oils even, that's still considered cooked. And it's disallowed. Ad kedon Rabbi Akiva. Okay, this concludes the words of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva with his drasha. How do you know not to cook the korban pesach in anything? Because of the drasha. Whereas Rabbi Yishmael says, Rabbi Yishmael Tani, Rabbi Shmuel kal v'chomer. Rabbi Shmuel says no, it's kal v'chomer. You know how you shouldn't cook the korban pesach in water because that's what says specifically in the Torah. How do I know not to cook them in other liquids? Ma'im, mayim, mayim. Or as kids nowadays, they say the word water in Hebrew, they leave out the yud. They just say ma'im, right? There are kids who say that. They leave out the yud. They shouldn't. Here it says ma'im, mayim, sheinam mifigin ta'aman. Okay. With regards to water, which doesn't ruin the taste of the korban pesach, if you cook it in there, atam ar aser, yet it's still forbidden. If you'd cook the korban pesach in water, the product, the pesach, wouldn't lose so much of its flavor. Not so much. Sha'ar mashkin shemafigin taman lo kol shekain. The other liquids that would do much worse or much better job, depending on which process you're looking at, but they do a lot more to remove the taste of the korban pesach. Shouldn't that be a kal v'chomer that you can't cook the korban pesach in that? When you cook the korban pesach in water, it loses so much taste. If you cook it in grape juice, if you'd cook it in apple juice or in oil, in barbecue sauce, it would lose so much more of its taste. So that should certainly be forbidden.
No deep fried korban pesach.
No deep fried korban pesach. No. Okay, but you understand what's the assumption of Rabbi Shmuel's kal v'chomer? You don't have to agree with the kal v'chomer's conclusion, but the premise of the kal v'chomer is we're trying to preserve the korban pesach. The water is bad because it ruins the taste of the korban pesach. Kal v'chomer if you cook it in other liquids. Now Rabbi Akiva could say, yeah, but we have a drasha. He could agree with the premise of the kal v'chomer, but he doesn't have to agree with the conclusion. Okay, so you understand that that's what Rabbi Shmuel's saying here is that I'm looking at the reasoning behind the prohibition. It is certainly clear that at least according to Rabbi Shmuel, the reason for the prohibition that Chazal were talking that the Torah gives us specifically, don't cook your korban pesach. Why? It ruins the flavor. So that's an answer to the chiduk. Why? So at least according to Rabbi Shmuel, that's the Rishonim. Before we go into what the Babli says, let's see what the Rambam says. Which halacha does the Rambam hold like? Rabbi Shmuel or Rabbi Akiva? Well, I color coded it so you can see over here. It says mivushal shehizira alav Torah. The cooked korban pesach that the Torah told us not to do. Bein shenit bashel b'mayim, whether it's cooked in water. Bein shenit bashel b'shar mashkin o b'mei piroth, any other beverage or any other fruit juice, also forbidden, as it says shenamar uvashel mivushal ribahakol. This pasuk says b'mayim bashel mivushal teaches you to include all things in which you could potentially cook your korban pesach. This fits what the Yerushalmi attributes to Rabbi Akiva, not to Rabbi Yishmael. My nafkamina. So, we're going to see. The Gemara is going to ask that. Oh, good. So, and then I have here the orange opinion, which says, what's included in cooking? Let's say he roasted it and then cooks it. Like the bagels. Proper bagels are first dunked in water and then baked. So the korban pesach, this is roasted, and then he's like, well, the fancier cooking is 2 stages, and then he's going to throw it into a pot with water. Okay, first he boils it a little bit, a pre-boiling, and then he's going to roast it. Yeah, and they do this with French fries also. There's a way also. You're supposed to blanch the French fries and then fry them or something like that. Okay, yeah, all these things that really not. Well, you could do all sorts of things to hurt your health. I heard one guy. Whatever. Okay. Next, Ori says asahu tzli kedar or tzli kedera. The Rambam says. I attribute this to the gold opinion also. Tzli kedera means hot roasted. Tzli kedera is there's one way. Cholent, you actually put in other liquids there to roast your meat. If you just throw meat into a pot and use dry heat and you salt it and everything, eventually juices are going to come out of the meat, its own natural gravy. That's the way we use that special pot. We use it for Shabbos. Right? This is the one I like the best. So if a person were to eat any of these, the korban pesach in any of these ways, that's considered what? Cooked, prohibited. And he's going to be lashed for such thing. And you could base the korban pesach with whichever way you like while it's roasting, except with water. You can't, spray some water onto it while it's roasting. You could season the meat any way you want after it's been roasted. Like I said before, that was the thing, umat bilin. So he says litabel with a tet. And it doesn't mean with a tuff. With the tuff would be literally to season, like from the word tfalin or tavlin. In this case, it means to, dip it in barbecue sauce or whatever it is once it's on your plate. The mashkin of mei peros. Once again, mashkin and mei peros. That's what the Rambam would call today all our sources, not our sources. Let's see what the Rishomi says about the Bavli says about this. Same Mishnah, but just the Bavli's statement. Here it's reversed. The opinion that we saw before, the Kal V'chomer in black and bold, that's going to be stated first, and the opinion that's saying that's going to derive this halacha from a drasha, an exposition of the extraneous or the seemingly extraneous language of the pasuk, is going to come second, and also the names are changed. Tanu Rabbanon, or Tano Rabbanon, that's the correct way. Bamayim ainli el b'mayim. Actually, it should say Tanu Rabbanon. You know why? What kind of oven did Chazal use? Tanur Rabbanon. Haha. Okay, so it says you have to roast it in an oven. B'mayim ainli el b'mayim. Shar mashkim minayin. It says I shouldn't cook the korban pesach in water. How do I know not to use other liquids? Amarta kal v'chomer. Well, there's a kal v'chomer, of course. Uma mayim ishein mefigan tamon asurin. If I shouldn't use water, according to the pasuk, because and those don't really destroy the taste so much. Water is plural, right? Shar mashkin shemefigan tamon lo kol shekain. The other liquids in which I could potentially cook the korban pesach, they do a much stronger job of removing the taste of the korban pesach. So these, of course, should be prohibited to use. Once again, this assumption of the kal v'chomer is, what are we trying to do? What's the reason for the prohibition? Because you don't want to ruin the taste, right?
Wait.
Yes.
Theoretically, according to literature, isn't it? It sounds like they're saying with the game they take their taste to the korban festival. They take out the taste of the korban.
Okay, yes, that could be. Yeah, they mifigin ta'aman, but mayim doesn't have taste. Okay, so it could be, yeah. Either way, mifigin ta'aman lo kol shekain. So they impart their own taste. Okay. Either way, what's the problem here? The korban pesach don't taste like korban pesach. I'm trying to say it. The whole point of eating korban pesach, just like matzah and maror, until this point was, what were the halachas were applied to maror? What's the rule? Like the Rambam says, the taste. As long as it still tastes like maror the way it's supposed to be. And what makes matzah the fulfilling the obligation of matzah? It still tastes like matzah. If it lost its matzah taste, you ruined it. Cooked it with something else. Do you dip your matzah? What's the only thing you don't put into charoses? According to the Rambam, everything's dipped in charoses, right? Right. You're supposed to take your thing. Technically speaking, that's what Hillel did. Hillel, on matzah, maror, and korban pesach, whole sandwich together, and he dipped it in charoses. The Rambam says you're supposed to take your matzah and maror together and dip them in charoses and eat it, right? And also, I think the karpas. Okay, but the korban pesach, there's no mitzvah to eat in charoses. You don't dip the korban pesach in charoses. You could eat it with charoses if you want, technically speaking. Either way, so this kal v'chomer appears in both the Rishami and the Bavli. Now, the kal v'chomer, it might not be accepted by everybody, its conclusion, but the premise is they don't say, like, how do you know that's anything behind this? Like, what is preserving the taste of the korban pesach have to do with this halacha? They didn't say this with regards to other kachim, but they say that with regarding whom? Korban pesach. So this would be enough. Rabbi says, hold on one second. Ainli omer b'mayim. The pasuk says water. Ainli elamayim. So technically speaking, I would have thought that the prohibition is just to cook the korban pesach in water. Shar mashkin minayin. How do I know how to cook it in other things? In tinsiloma arav Hashem l'shal mikol makom. So that's why the pasuk tells you Hashem l'vushal mikol makom. Any way you cook it. So you can't cook it in any types of liquids. So we have here that Rabbi Akiva, the opinion attributed to Rabbi Akiva in the Yerushalmi, is Rabbi Yehuda Nasi in the Bavli. That's why I wrote in the next line, my own words. And you can tell it's my own words because it's not indented and because it's in Helvetica font and not in Times New Roman font. It says, Chacham devraisa b'Bavli, heim Rabbi Shmuel by Yerushalmi. See? The Chachamim in this brisa right here, brought in the Bavli, fit Rabbi Shmuel as brought in the Yerushalmi up here. And Rabbi in this brisa over here, right over here, fits Rabbi Akiva up here in the Yerushalmi, right? That's cool. And the Rambam holds like whom? He brings the words of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi and Rabbi Akiva over here. The Rambam says, how do I know you can't cook korban pesach in apple juice, in barbecue sauce? Because bashal mevushal. Rambam doesn't say the kal v'chomer, right? Okay. But so the Rambam does he not hold? I guess he doesn't hold the conclusion of the kal v'chomer, as brought by the Chachamim of the Yerushalmi, of the Bavli, and Rabbi Shmuel of the Yerushalmi. Okay, that's the first thing. So what did we learn from this kal v'chomer, though? The kal v'chomer is brought by the Chachamim. I guess the question is, why does the Rambam? How does the Rambam know to paskin like Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yodanasi against Rabbi Shmuel and the Chacham?
Well, I was doing the older because Rabbi Akiva, unless there's other rabbis.
Well, so I don't know necessarily about that. I do know the Chachamim have here. It's pretty clear in this Rabbi Yodanasi against the rest of the Chachamim. So usually the halacha follows the Chachamim. The Mishneh Tishnik, at least in the Bavli. Okay, we'll wait because there are good answers to this question that have been offered by those before us. So, what's the hanacha of the Kal V'chomer? The problem, as I wrote here, Abayam b'shul hu hafagas ata'am, right? The water and the Kal V'chomer, the mashkin, do this, whatever it is. They cause an expiration of the taste. Okay, so the taina of the Kal V'chomer hasn't been broken apart. By the way, they don't say that it's a Kal V'chomer. The Chachamim could have answered. By the way, we don't have a line in the Yerushalmi or the Bavli saying that Kal V'chomer doesn't work because how do you know that's the reason? Anything? How do you know that's the pasuk getting at that you have to eat it roasted and not cooked because you're trying to preserve the taste of the Korban Pesach?
Well, theoretically, there's no halachic difference between them. Because you could say that Chachamim agree that the tom of why there's a rule.
Yeah, the read, yes, that yes.
They just learn it from a different place.
Yes, yes. That's what I'm trying to suggest. That the premise of the Kal V'chomer, that we all agree that we're trying to preserve the taste of Korban Pesach. But can you then say, and therefore, if water would ruin the Korban Pesach taste, then of course you can't use other liquids? Or do you say the other liquids were already disqualified because of the extraneous words, bashal, mavushal, in the pasuk? Okay, let's continue with this. Tanas Kal V'chomer L'Hufrikla Ela She'ein Latzorech Im Hadrasha. That means with the drasha, there's no necessity for the Kal V'chomer, even if they agree that the premise is there. Okay, there's no necessity for it. So the Gemara asks, what's the nafkamina between these two general approaches to Korban Pesach? My benayu ikim benayu tzli kedar. We're going to read Rashi. Tzli kedar is also what the Rambam calls tzli kedera. Kedar is just the masculine form of kedera. And a kadar, what's a kadar? That's the guy who makes earthenware pots. Also, what? No, he's the kadar is the guy also. What? Yeah, it's talking about pot roast. Okay, the kadar with the dagation and the dalid is the guy mentioned once again above a comma who makes pots, right? The pot maker out of earthenware. It used to be they did not have such fancy pots like we do. Our pots are superior to their pots. Why? Because we have stainless steel. Okay, so it works a lot better. Teflon and things like that. So Rashi says, "Lemandi yalif la mi kal v'chomer." Those who would use this kal v'chomer, like the Chachamim Rabbi Shmuel, hachashare sli kedar is good. Why? That apparently preserves the taste and doesn't use other liquids. If you're doing a proper sli kedar, you just throw on some salt and some spices, dry stuff, onto your pot roast and just let it do its thing within the pot. Right? Salt, garlic, and black pepper. But according to Rabbi Akiva and Rebbe, the Yolef Me Rebuya, they learned this halacha from the drasha bashal mavushal, hanami bashal mavushal hu va'aser. Okay, so that should be prohibited also, according to at least the opinion that Rambam accepts. That the pasuk teaches bashal mavushal b'mayim and sharmashkin, and the juices itself of the Korban Pesach, the stuff that comes out of the Korban Pesach itself in the pot of the kedera. So that would also be considered mavushal. And by the way, the Rambam holds of that. That's why I put this Rashi in gold. You go back to the Rambam up here. The Rambam says, "O she'asot tzli kedera is still achalo chayav." The person who makes such a thing is liable. So the Rambam holds like the opinion mentioned over here in the name of Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Akiva in the in the Rishalmi and Rabbi in the Bavli. Okay? Yeah, good. Rabbanon, hi bashim avushu ma'avidlihu. We have to ask the rabbis. The rabbis have this kal v'chomer, right? The hafagas hatam kal v'chomer. What do they do with the drasha? They don't have a rule that they learned from bashim avushul. The Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi learned that you're not supposed to use sharmashkin and sli kedera would be usher. What do they do with this pasuk? They learned from what we saw in a different brisa. What is this? This line. They use it to learn a different drasha, a different rule. That, get this rule. If it was cooked and then roasted, or roasted then cooked, also no good. A person's going to be hit with the sin for doing that, just for the act of cooking it. By the way, kal v'chomer for eating it. So wait a minute, but this is why called the orange rule, and this orange rule is brought by whom? Also the Rambam. See, this orange rule is right here in the Rambam, but this orange rule apparently is is it unanimous? This rule, we said that the rabbis who don't use who use the kal v'chomer and not the drasha, then use the drasha to learn this rule. So Rambam seems to be contradicting himself over here. The fact that he holds of you can't cook the korban pesach in things other than water, that's from the drasha. And then the Rambam brings this other rule that cooked then roasted, or roasted then cooked, which also comes from this bashal mavushal language, is also a halacha. Should I say it again?
Well, you're saying if he didn't know what it was like.
No, he held both sides of the candle. He burned it from burned the wicks at both sides. This over here, if you see on this orange line in the Bavli, right? This orange line, which is an add-on according to the black bold opinion. That's the Chachamim and Rabbi Shmuel say the kal v'chomer, not the drasha, to learn the rules of cooking the korban pesach, or rules of how you're not supposed to cook the korban pesach. They have this brisa over here that says that bashal mavushal teaches the language. Bashal mavushal teaches you not don't cook the korban pesach in any liquid. You already learned that from a kal v'chomer. Instead, it teaches you don't cook the korban pesach after you roasted it, or don't roast it after you cooked it. The question should now be, where do Rabbi Akiva and Rebbe get this rule? Do they subscribe to this rule? Because this rule apparently is sourced from their bashal mavushal drasha, and they're using bashal mavushal drasha for something else. Either way, the Rambam holds like Rabbi Akiva and Rebbe with their bashal mavushal drasha. He said that explicitly, but also holds another rule that comes from the same drasha. And usually the rule is you only get to derive one rule from each drasha. What does bashal mavushal teach you, Rambam? Rambam says, like Rebbe and Rabbi Akiva, namely, that I'm not supposed to cook the korban pesach in other liquids. That's what the Rambam says explicitly right up here. And there's another rule that comes from this, that you can't cook the korban pesach after roasting it, or you can't roast it after you cook it. Both of these rules apparently have the same source. So Rambam can't do that. So that's what I wrote here. Rambam. Okay. Both opinions seem to be brought by the Rambam. No. Let's see that. Mashmeshu pasak Rebbe. He said explicitly, he holds like Rebbe. He holds explicitly Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. How do we know that? And Rabbi Akiva. Why? He says the drasha that they said, and he also says the nafkamina that they would hold like. What is Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yehuda Nasi's drasha? Bashal mavushal teaches you shouldn't cook the korban pesach in any liquid. That's the drasha. And he says that explicitly. And he also says the consequence of that is you shouldn't even cook your korban pesach in tzli kedar. Right? That's also a type of bashal mavushal in another liquid. So he holds like Rabbi and Rabbi Yehuda Nas, Rabbi Akiva. Twice he says it. And then the Rambam throws in, and you also shouldn't cook your pesach after roasting it. You shouldn't roast it after cooking it. That's also derivative of the bashal mavushal drasha. And that's the one that the Chachamim Rabbi Shmuel did.
Where they get to have the drasha to teach them about the Shalom Shkirim, but then they agree with the Tom, so that is
yes. Muskam al kol. Okay, bishul achar tzlio efich muskam al kol. This rule, this additional rule that you can't cook the korban pesach after roasting it, you can't roast it after cooking it, must be across the board. It doesn't need a drasha to be taught. Why? Because the Rambam used the drasha already to teach us you can't cook korban pesach in other liquids. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says it, Rabbi Akiva says it, and the consequence is it you can't cook tzli kedar. Rambam 100% is with the bashal mavushal drasha. And this other rule that you can't cook the korban pesach after roasting it, or vice versa, which apparently would come from the bashal mavushal drasha, doesn't come from that drasha according to the Rambam. It's just a general rule. You can't cook the korban pesach after roasting it. You can't roast it after cooking it. You don't need a drasha to tell you that. Why? We're going to see why. Okay? But that's what I'm trying to say. Ella shalolom dimotom ella shonu vashal mavushal. That's why I should put this line over here. If you're following me online, also this should be bolded. Okay? According to the Rambam, it must be this line in the orange over here doesn't need to be derived from the pasuk, like Rabbi Akiva, like the Rabbi Yishmael and the Chachamim are doing. It doesn't need to be derived there because it should be obvious based on every other thing we know. Let's go into it. The Gemara continues with the kasha. Okay, and we're going to see the teretz of the kasha will tell you what the Rambam's thinking, goes and it connects it to the matzah. Bishlama bishlov achakach slo chayav. The Gemara says, I understand if you were to cook the korban pesach and afterwards roast it, he's chayav. He's liable. Why? He basically cooked the korban pesach. You can't fix it by roasting it. You already ruined it. You cooked it. Dehab bishaleh. He already cooked it. Bishaleh or bishalo in Hebrew. He already cooked it. Elat slov achakach bishalo. What if he were to roast it? Now he roasted korban pesach and then he cooks it. Hatzli eshu, but it's still been roasted. He just charge the obligation to roast the korban pesach. You told me he could roast it, right? Let's strengthen the kasha. He could roast the korban pesach, and then on the plate while it's boiling hot, he dumps in hot ketchup on his plate, right? Hot barbecue sauce, hot korban pesach fresh off the barbecue grill into hot, barbecue sauce and eat that. That's not considered mavushal. He can do that. So why can't I just cook it a little bit, put it into an actual like pan with a little, I don't know, something barbecue sauce, and then eat the korban pesach that way after mostly roasting it? Why can I do that? Amai. Good question, right? That's the kasha. It reminds me, there was a guy, he had the pretzel place, fancy, designer pretzels back in Queens. And so we went to try the pretzels there. And they're very oily. It tastes like fried pretzels, very oily pretzels, I asked him, dude, do you fry these pretzels or something? Right? And he said, no, they're baked. So I said, well, how do they get so hot and oily? He's like, right when they come out of the oven, they throw them into hot butter. Basically fried. It's like a little bit of a little fry afterwards. Okay, fine. So, either way, so the teretz of the Gemara is here. Amar Rav Kahana. Rav Kahana says, Hamani, this opinion that you shouldn't cook it and roast it, or you shouldn't roast it and then cook it, whose opinion is that? Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi said something. That's why I put this in purple. And you'll see, wait, purple is the opinion that said you can't cook your matzah. If you cook your matzah, you ruin the taste of the matzah. This is Rabbi Yossi's opinion. Rabbi Yossi says, Yotzein burakika sharui umvushal shalon yimoach. The Brisa says one could discharge his obligation to eat matzah on Passover with a rakik, which doesn't mean biscuit, by the way. Rakik means, as translated, that's a biblical term meaning a flatbread. Rakik is flatbread, and as mentioned by Onkelos and Rashi and Rambam and anybody else who commented on this word, which is common because they used to make rakikim a lot in the temple. It means ispogim, spongy but flat. Okay, so you can't use a matzah rakik, a flat matzah that's been soaked in water, gebrucht, shruya, or cooked. That it did, as long as it didn't decompose entirely. If you cook, let's say, any type of bread, biscuit or loaf or anything like that, you cook it quickly, it might still be like a sponge, but eventually it starts to come apart, right? Disintegrates in the water. So as long as it didn't get there, that's what Rabbi Meir says. That's Rabbi Meir's opinion. Rabbi Yossi says, Yotzein burakika sharui, you can discharge your obligation to eat matzah with a flatbread that's been soaked. And by the way, you could do this if you have a hard time eating cracker matzah, spray on a little bit of water and I'll soften it. Or even let it sit in some water beforehand. That's rakik sharui. Most people wouldn't do that, but like if hard time chewing, so do that. But you can't use a cooked matzah even if it hasn't disintegrated. That is, you took one of your hardest cracker matzahs that we have and you cooked it in water, and it's still not falling apart, right? Okay. Rashi says the lav lechem karina beg. Once you cook the matzah, it's no longer bread. What is Rabbi Yossi saying? This was the rule that Rambam brought at the end of matzah. We saw above in purple. Rambam said you can't cook a matzah and use that to discharge your obligation on Passover. It doesn't taste like bread anymore. Rambam says it doesn't taste like bread. Rashi says it's not called bread. It doesn't have the Torah of bread. It's been cooked. Oh, it still looks entirely like bread. You could tell something's wrong with this matzah. It looks a little bit bigger and soft and wet. Okay? But it's not matzah anymore. It's not bread. All it is, wait a minute, you didn't add ingredients. To make this matzah, all it was wheat and water. And all I did to cook it was make it, boil it with more water. But you can't use this for Passover. You ruin the taste of the bread. Wait a minute. We're talking about Korban Pesach. The question was, how do I know that I can't roast my Korban Pesach and then cook it? That would ruin the Korban Pesach? Because it says if you do it to matzah, it wouldn't be matzah. If you were to cook Korban Pesach after roasting it, it's no longer Korban Pesach. Or in Rambam's words, it no longer tastes like Korban Pesach. Okay? So now you understand. This is the conclusion of the Gemara. So now I'll read you the words here. Adayin hu chitin, and ela she'inu lechem. Uchmoshe kasav Rambam le'el, hare ein ba tam hapas. Okay? If you were to cook your matzah, it's no longer bread, as Rashi says, or Rambam says, it no longer tastes like bread. Tam hapas. Shitas Rabbi Yossi hit kabla lalacha. The sheet of Rabbi Yossi regarding matzah. Cooking your matzah makes it no longer taste like matzah. It's no longer bread. Right? So that's the halacha. That's the agreed upon halacha. Vehi gama makor ledin shebasar pesach. Basar pesach shetzlo vaz bishlo eno kasher. That's also the source for the rule that you can't cook korban pesach meat after it's been properly roasted. It disqualifies it, it ruins it. Shekamosha bishul horeset tam afiyas matzah, just like the cooking ruins the taste of baked matzah. Kimochen abishul horeses tam tzlias pesach. That's what the Gemara is telling you. Bishul, cooking the pesach, even after you roasted it, ruins it. Hainu, Rambam kibel es hanocha shel kal v'chomer. So Rambam agrees to the hanocha of the kal v'chomer. The premise of the kal v'chomer, which he rejected the halacha, is still accepted. The basis is we're trying to preserve korban pesach taste. V'chol ze gam l'das Rabbi Kiva Rabbi sheinam somchim al totzas kal v'chomer, but they don't hold of the result of the kal v'chomer because they have a drasha. Okay, which is Rabbi Yishmael's kal v'chomer. Nimsa shel chol deos tachlis tzlias pesach. We see from according to all the opinions, the reason, okay, or the purpose of roasting korban pesach, according to this Gemara discussion, is dafka kedei l'shamer tama, in order to preserve the taste of korban pesach. And matter of fact, we learn that you can't discharge obligation of cooked matzah from the case of korban pesach. They go hand in hand. That's the Gemara basically equates the two. Okay, so and there's another teretz over here. Ula says no, maybe Rabbi Meir. We could say that Rabbi Meir also tells us you can't use what's wrong with cooked korban pesach after it's been roasted. Even though Rabbi Meir says that you could do that with bread, you could cook your matzah and still use it on pesach, even though we don't hold it like that. But why would he disqualify korban pesach done that way? Because more drasha, bashal mavushal even includes matzah that was then cooked, but we don't hold that way. So this is good. I have a line here from the Kesef Mishnah, who goes through the Tosfos here and brings the whole Gemara as it is. And I'll read the bold line because we want to cover more ground here. It says, Kaven de Rabbanan Islu Rabbi Meir. Okay. V'les hilchasak Rabbi Meir b'hahi. Okay. The rabbis supposedly they could hold like Rabbi Meir, but we sit the halacha is not like Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir was talking about cooking matzah. We don't hold that way, right? Ela Rabbi Yossi. We hold like Rabbi Yossi, Kedefasak Rabbeinu. Zal Hilchos Chametz Matzah. The Rambam Paskin Hilchos Chametz Matzah. You can't use cooked matzah for your obligation, right? That's Rabbi Yossi's opinion. Pasak Rabbeinu Zal Kirabi Uvitzlahu Vachakak Bishalo Misvara Yadanale. Okay, the fact they hold like Rebbe, and with regards to korban pesach, which is roasted and then cooked. Remember, Rebbe says what? Drasha, not a kal v'chomer, drasha, and that includes all these, different liquids. Misvarya danale, midi dahava matzah de ein yotzin b'mvushel. It was a svara. It's a simple svara that you can't cook your korban pesach after roasting it. It's not asked anything to do with the kal v'chomer. It's just a svara. Why? Just like matzah that's been cooked has been ruined, so too korban pesach, which has then been cooked, even after roasting, has been ruined. Zeh naf nearly ladas Rabbeinu Zal. So this seems to be the opinion of Rabbeinu. That's the Rambam. So I'll give a final line that's a joke. I missed a joke this week. I told the guy I'm taking a bunch of my kids to do korban pesach this year. I need to find a goat, right? He told me, if you have kids, why do you need a goat? And I totally missed it. Like, what? No, I'm looking for. I'm trying to arrange it right now. And I'm like, oh man, yeah. So, yeah. So if you're thinking too much in Hebrew, you don't realize that the kids itself. I explained to one guy here. Says, what's the joke? I said, kids is just slang. In proper Hebrew, a proper English, the word kid refers to a young goat, a kid goat. And the proper English word for children is children. Okay? In Yiddish, it's sort of similar. It's kinder. Kinder sounds almost like kids, right? So, mahu hatam lazeh shechayvim litzlot al Pesach. If I ask you, ma what tam shechayvim litzlot al Pesach? Hatam, yeah. Ma tam, hatam, yeah. See, it's a play on the both meanings of the word ta'am. Okay. Now there's a line here. They didn't quote from the Haggadah of Pesach. Um, bring it over here. Hold on a second. Yeah, yeah. Get it? No. No, so someone asked you, if you'd ask me, what's Maseches Demai? What is that? And the answer is B'diuk. Demai means what is it? Da Mai. Okay, it's like class today we're going to start Maseches Demai. Rebbe, what is that exactly? Okay, same thing. What's the ta'am for roasting for Pesach? The ta'am. Now, like I said, I don't want to get on the chinuch's case, but now if I were to go back and write the chinuch, I would say that the reason for the Torah giving us the commandment, at least according to the assumption of this whole discussion in the Gemara, and by the way, there's nafka mina halacha, is the reason we're told to eat the korban pesach roasted and not to cook the korban pesach is not because it has anything to do with tzli is fancier, it's more mechubit to eat it that way. It's because why? What do Chazal assume? Not like the chinuch. It's in order to preserve the taste of the korban pesach. It's not necessarily fancier because then sikadera. What's the real nafkamina? No, that would ruin the taste. And by the way, if there was a whole big thing to eat like mechubadim at korban pesach, we're dafka eating matzah. That we said is lach ba'anya. Aniyim eat korban pesach. Not only that, what's the other rule that you have to eat matzah like aniyim? That's not. That's what it means lechem oni, poor bread. So there's a few nafkaminas. The oni of matzah means you have to eat it. It has to be baked in a poor manner without any fancy ingredients. It has to be halachlu lechem oni, and you have to eat befrusa, which means that before you recite the blessing upon eating the matzah, you already don't use a whole loaf or a whole cake of matzah, right? You use a prusa. Normally, when one says the blessing on the bread, let's say during a week, there's no mitzvah to use a whole bread, but it is better to use a whole bread if possible instead of a slice of bread, a shlema. But on yes, on Sabbaths and Yontif, generally speaking, you still have lechem mishnah, two whole for the blessing. But specifically on Passover, and many Rishonim, the Vilna Gaon points down the Rambam. Many point down the Rambam. Now, as the Rambam say at the Seder, you're already supposed to have the matzah, and by the way, you're only supposed to have two matzahs. One of them is supposed to be prusa by the time you're saying the bracha. Every time you eat matzah on Passover, it should be prusa. That is your yontif meal the first day, and on Shabbos Chol Moed, and on the seventh day of Pesach, or the eighth day, if you have yontif shein shel galus, every time you do lechem mishnah on Pesach, one of those lechem mishnah should be broken beforehand. Okay, the matzah should stay lechem oni until the very end, every time. Okay, so that's why at least. Well, so why not shviras etzem? So that's a good question. Wait a minute. So now we saw the chinuch's idea has been unfortunately shot down. That this whole idea, like he says, that from some of the halachas mean that you're supposed to do it in a more mechubadik manner. By the way, the idea of derech cherus, the way we drink 4 cups, for example, that's all derabanan. None of the mitzvahs of the Korban Pesach necessarily mean that. Chazal never said that. All the takanas that Chazal added were derech cherus. But this whole idea that when we don't break the bones, we're supposed to be more mechubadik, we saw that that's a little bit iffy based on the sources. And that might not be the reason. And also, if that was the reason, we'd expect to find that with regards to other korbanos also, right? Okay. They should, and just like Rav Chisda said, a kohen who eats matana should eat it, fancy, eat it like roasted. So maybe we should have thrown in and don't break the bones, show some respect. I don't know. So I would like to offer that the shviras etzem is itself something else entirely. And based on this is something I put in the Haggadah. I think this is one of the weakest things I put in the Haggadah, but I think it's still legitimate. And that is the idea of shviras etzem is a halacha that's introduced after the Exodus, at least in the order of the text. There are those who say that this parsha, with regards to various halachas, zos hukasa pesach. Okay, it says here. I'll read it. It says the Jews, the Israelites left Egypt. Why Yisuv and Israel may Ramesses Sukkotha. They left from Ramses to Sukkoth. And then it says they had been in Egypt. They baked their bread because they didn't have time to let it rise, right? The whole Exodus. And it says, Be'etzem hayom hazeh yatzu kol b'nei kol tzivot Hashem me'eretz Mitzrayim. It was on this very day that the Jewish people left Egypt, right? And then the parsha begins. Vayomer Hashem Moshe v'Aaron zot hukat hapasach. Kol ben echar lo yichabal. Here are the rules of the Korban Pesach. Any person who's estranged from God should not eat it. I said ben echar really means a goy, right?
Okay.
So they say no, a person also estranged from God, meaning a meshumid Jew. Okay, that's why I said it so well. I think that's the way Onkelos translates it. And here it has a few of the halachas that we would have expected to find in the parshas before Makas Bechoros and the Exodus, which is Parshas HaKodesh, which is a little longer parsha talking about the laws of Korban Pesach, how they should have done it. And then the next parsha, which was Vayikra Moshe, when he tells the people, go get your Korban Pesachs and here's how you should do it, and put the blood on the doorpost and everything. And now we find halachas specifically after the Exodus story. We find that there are more halachas of Korban Pesach, many of which are doros. And it says, eat it in one house, and the etzem lo tishberuvo. It says here, I'll read it to you where it throws it in. See, it says here, it should be eaten in one house, means eaten by one group of people only. Lo totzimin abayit min basar chutza, and that's the Isser Chutzah, meaning that the Korban Pesach, once it's in its place, we discussed this in years past, it can't be removed from the room in which it's being eaten. You know, it's like Chutzah on Shabbos, just like you'd be hit with a prohibition if you take this item, this teacup, from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah. So too, the second you leave this Rosh Hashanah with Korban Pesach, you violate a commandment and you ruin that meat. And then it says, "Ve'etzem lo tishberuvo," and you shouldn't break any of its bones. That's thrown in after the Exodus. Now, those who say, like I said, all these halachas were applied even before to the first Korban Pesach done in Egypt, and then this series of halachas, this parsha over here, is bookended with once again, on this very day, God took out the children of Israel from Egypt by their hosts. So, wait a minute. It's a very interesting bookending of the pasuk. This is Dr. England type of work. It says, on this very day, the Jews left Egypt, right? And it's a leil shimurim hu Hashem. It had been a night guarded by God. What does shimurim mean? No, so that's modern Hebrew. What does it mean? The designated night, right? It says twice, leil shimurim hu l'chol b'nei Israel. So it says this day that they went out, this etzem hayom hazeh, right? They went out. And then it says in the middle parsha, and by the way, don't break the etzem of a Korban Pesach. And then it just throws in another pasuk, a recap. Vayhi be'etzem hayom hazeh, yatzeu hotzi Hashem et b'nei Israel me'eretz Yisrael. God took them out. So my suggestion was the etzem tells you twice, right before it tells you don't break the etzem, don't break a bone of Korban Pesach. It connects it with what? Not the actual act of eating, the roasting, etc. What is the etzem hayom hazeh connect to etzem lo tishberubo? It says ba'id echad ye'echel lo totzi min habayit. Eat the Korban Pesach within this group, in this house, meaning with this particular group, and don't take it anywhere out of the house. And don't break the Korban Pesach bones. So the breaking of the bone is connected more to this rule of the participants. It has to be these very people, the designated people in this designated place. Here and now. These people, this place. That's what halacha means. Just like Kohanim in the Beis HaMikdash, participants of Korban Pesach in the house that's been designated for eating Korban Pesach. And God made this very day designated for taking the Jews out of Egypt. This Etzem day, and this is the day he actually did it.
Okay.
So that means because God kept this very day, this day was already set aside in history. Chazal tell us this, just like the Machon Beis HaMikdash was decided on already from creation. That's when Adam himself was created there, and that's where he offered sacrifice. That's where Noah offered sacrifice. That's where Avraham Avinu offered sacrifice, and so did Yaakov Avinu, right? Okay. That very place. So that's where you're supposed to build a temple. So it says this very day is the day that was designated as Pesach long ago. What happened on Pesach before Pesach in history? So Chazal say that was the day Sodom was overturned.
Oh yeah,
yeah. That's also the day that became Isaac's birthday. Okay, that day was an auspicious day. God was telling him today you're doing what Avraham Avinu basically did when he greeted the angels was basically offer a sacrifice to God, as we pointed out in the Onkelos and in the Zohar. Avraham Avinu met the angels. It was basically a big korban ceremony.
Okay,
right. So that was, and then they told him tonight we're going to destroy Sodom. By the next morning, Moha Shachar Allah. When Avraham Avinu went out to Daven Vasikin, and Lot was leaving at dawn, and by the time that the sun rose over the land, Sodom was gone. that day had been designated. So we have this also, we have words elsewhere online. You go see it, that God sets aside days in history, auspicious days, even before the day actually happens in history. So Shmini Atzeres is marked on the calendar as a day to be a holiday, since God gave the Torah to Moses, even though the actual event in history that it marks only happened 480 years later. That was Shmini Atzeres celebrates the inauguration of the first temple. That's the day in history. So for a few hundred years, they celebrate a day that it yet to happen. Or Shabbos, God designated the Sabbath day when He created the world, but only became a holy day observed by people when the Torah was given at Sinai on Sabbath, by the way. Okay, so what was Yom Kippur? Yom Kippur was a day that existed. Why? What happened on that day? That's the day God forgave the Jews for the sin of the golden calf. And Sukkot is the day that the clouds of glory came back. And the marked days on the calendar we have, I'll tell you, the next Jewish holidays are going to be when Shiva Asar with Tammuz and Tisha B'av. Those already been marked as holidays. They just haven't been potentialized. Sorry, they haven't been realized. Their potential has not been realized as a holiday, but they're meant to be holidays. Okay, we're just waiting for it. So too, Etzem Hayom Hazeh, the prohibition of breaking the Korban Pesach's bones in context has to do with the fact that the Etzem Hayom Hazeh is the day the Jews left Egypt. It's a memorial not to that they're now privileged by God, which I agree. The premise of the chinuch is correct. God wants to honor the Jewish people. He brings them close to Him. They're Am Segula and they're Mamleches Kohanim. But this prohibition, don't break the bones of the Korban Pesach, is connected more to the fact that remember that Pesach was the day designated by God in history for the Exodus. That's what it means in context. Because use the same words. God kept this Etzem day, and now you keep the Etzem. It's the same word. Okay. Yeah, that's all. So that's why I believe is the reason. Why do I offer this reason over the chinuch? Because the reason the chinuch gives is what are you going to do? It doesn't fit with the Talmud. Yeah. So that's the first topic. Let's move into the next one. By the way, so now draw a conclusion. We have now seen Talmudic sources for the reasons why we eat Korban Pesach specifically with a certain taste, and maror with a certain taste, and matzah with a certain taste. They're all connected zeh b'zeh, which is unique in all the holidays. There is no commandment on the Sabbath or any other holiday or any time a person eats sacrificial meat during the year, for that matter, to eat the food to taste a certain way. You don't have to have cheesecake on Shavuos. You don't have to have a hamantashen on Purim. And you don't have to have cholent or gefilte fish on Shabbos. Yeah, we're used to these things, but no one said that your food has to taste a certain way. And Sukkot is called v'chomer. There's nothing you have to eat on Sukkot that tastes a certain way. And even the meat that you eat as a mitzvah on Sukkot, shalmi chagiga, right? And other festive meat can be eaten any which way, and there's no commandment that your food should taste a certain way. But on Pesach, the taste is all that matters. Why is it, by the way, the taste matters? Rabbi Gamliel says it. Rabbi Gamliel was Hillel HaZaken's grandson. Hillel HaZaken took this very literally. What did Hillel HaZaken do? And it says that he was Das Yochid. We hold that you're not supposed to do this. If one were to have Korban Pesach actually on the table, Hillel said, Al matzot umerorim yochiluhu, make it all into a sandwich and eat them all together. That's what says Hillel did. Okay. But you're not supposed to do like Hillel. The halacha is not like Hillel. You can eat matzah and maror technically together, but you can't eat the Korban Pesach in the same bite. If you'd sandwich them all like Hillel, you'd ruin it. Okay? Rabbi Gamliel says, why do we eat this matzah? Okay? Al shuma, matzah, zo, shanu ochlim, because it tastes like lechem oni, and also lo speak avosenu when they left Egypt. They have to, it has to be like they ate it, which wasn't a rush. Okay. And maror, why we eat maror? Maror is chayehem. It has to taste bitter because the Egyptians embittered their lives. And why do we eat matzah? Why do we eat Pesach? Because Hashem Pesach. It has to taste like Pesach because God passed over. When you think about that, wait a minute. You're eating something called Pesach because God passed over, right? Okay. And it has to taste like a Pesach. That's the taste of passing over. Like I was saying, etzem. You're telling me, but etzem I'm using for when God does etzem means this very day, and when I say etzem means bones of the animal. They're two different things entirely. Just one Hebrew word. No, I'm trying to tell you. Just like the taste of Korban Pesach is that taste that God passing over. And by the way, Uncle translate passing over as God took pity. It's too literal. It's an anthropomorphism. It's supposed to mean one thing. Either way, the taste of passing over is roasted lamb. The taste of hardship and rush and chipazon is bread.
Oh.
Lechem oni and lechem chipazon. There's two matzahs. There's begin halach ma'anya. That's lechem oni and chipazon. The rush to get out. That taste is unleavened bread baked without additions. If you were to unleaven your bread, but you used like sweet juices, wine and oil and honey, you've made matzah shiro. That doesn't count for Passover. You can't use that. It's kosher, but it doesn't. It's not lechem oni. It's the taste. These three foods have to have the taste that the Torah says they have, because they remind you of exactly what happened. So the roasted korban pesach tastes like a pesach because God passed over, so to speak. That's the name of the holiday even.
Okay.
We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. If you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.